Hello and welcome, New Zealand Prepper here. If you're new, great. If you're not, welcome back. So we're just going to get in with the video very quickly. I did want to say there is some financial stuff in it. I'm not a financial advisor. Don't take anything I say as financial advice. This is a prepping channel. It's for information and enjoyment. And basically, my aim here is to inform you so that you can go and be prepared for what's coming up as I see it. We do not want any violence. We do not incite violence here. We do not want riots. And yeah, just enjoy. Alright, shall we get into this then? What do you think? Alright. Hello and welcome everyone, New Zealand Prepper here. Today we've got a bit of an unscripted video. I thought I'd come and just have a bit of a chat, and today what I want to talk to you about is what I see coming forward in New Zealand. Right, where do we start? I suppose a little bit of context for people who don't know exactly what's going on. So here in New Zealand we have had a fair bit of inflation over the past couple of years. The official figures are saying it's about 7.5 to 8%, but it is not. And that is because we changed the way we measured the consumer price index inflation in about the late 80s, I believe. So it's completely different from then. If we'd measured by the way we measured it in the 80s, would be around 20%. Right, that's pretty shocking, isn't it? 20% inflation, roughly. But it's worse than that. We are having inflation exported to us, and we're importing it. Why? We don't produce a lot of the things that we need to here in New Zealand. They're coming from overseas. They're coming from countries like let's just say part of Europe and America, and those countries have large inflation as well, so we're getting that inflation from them and bringing it here. So this is going to cause us some problems moving forward, and we're already starting to see that. We've seen the fuel prices go up a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean some of them are over 100% in the last 13-14 months and climbing. And because we have 269,000 square kilometres here in New Zealand, which is a half decent size, we tend to travel a lot of that by freight in diesel powered trucks around the country. Diesel is one of the fuels that has gone up almost the most. So as we're shipping it around the country, we are spending a lot more. It takes a few months for those prices to be passed on, but they're all coming to us in every single item that we buy. Right. Next, we're going to talk about the housing market here in New Zealand. Yep, that's one thing that is important to look at, okay? Housing is very expensive here in New Zealand. We're a small population. We are starting to get more supply of housing, but at the time of this making, if you're going to buy a place in Auckland, it's going to cost you over $1.5 million New Zealand. Most other places around the country, you're not going to get anything lower than 600,000 or 700,000. Even in the suburbs, you'd be pressed to find anything lower than $500,000. And it's not that easy to make a lot of money. Like, people out here are not making on average 100 grand a year. A couple with both people working would probably make that. Some people a little more. In Auckland, possibly more than that if you work very hard and there's two of you. But the amount you earn to the amount you've got to pay out for your mortgage is considerable. It's well over a third of your income. Now that's a problem. And why is that a problem? Well, we've raised the OCR a couple of times because we're importing all of this inflation. What does that mean? Our OCR, as of a month ago, has gone up to 2%. 2 years ago, it was at 0%. Mortgage rates, they have gone from 2.5% roughly to now 5.5% to almost 6%, and that is climbing. Now a lot of people don't know this, but back in the 1970s, early 1980s, we had an interest rate of somewhere near 18%. But at that time, the average house cost around about 80 to 130 grand, right? So the interest rate on that amount was not so much. But we've had a big boom in the last 5 years. We've had a major boom. The house prices have gone crazy through the roof. We bought a house here, and it's worth double what we paid for it, and that's only in 5 years, roughly. But the tide has turned. There has been not enough supply for a long time, and it's taken close to 6 years, and they've finally started to get some of those houses they wanted to build built. So they are fixing the supply. At the same time, the mortgage cost is going up. Take that with new houses being flooded into the market, and what we're starting to see is a decline in the house pricing. When I say starting to see, our house is, from its expected sale price a year or so ago, it's down about 15% now. Alright, what's the next piece of the picture? Okay, you need to know that in New Zealand, if you're a first home buyer, you're going to need to get about 80% of what you want to pay for a house can be borrowed. It's only ballpark figures, so that means you're going to need about 20% equity, right? 20% equity, and what happens and what is about to happen coming up is the house price drop will soon exceed 20%. If you have bought your house at the top of the market in the last 14-15 months and you barely had 20% equity and you've borrowed the rest, your house price could soon drop below what you paid for it. This would mean you no longer have 20% equity. When that happens, you are technically in default, and the bank will ask you to top up the amount of equity in your house to keep it above 20%. If you cannot, you will have to sell it, and you will not get anything back for it because you're selling it to cover the debt. The reason this is we have a fractional reserve banking system where the bank needs to keep a certain amount of equity to its debt. If it does not, it is in technical default. This is all should be making sense. It seems to be relatively straightforward, but I am aware that a lot of people won't have looked at this as much as I have. So, what am I telling you to do? I'm telling you to reduce your debt as quickly as possible. If you look at your minimum mortgage repayment and you think if that were to go up 3 times, if you could can still pay that, you'll be in a better position than most, I would say. But that is the reality of what you're looking at coming in the next 3 years. This is because the OCR currently at 2% is going to have to raise to somewhere near 6 or 7% just to get to the level of what they allegedly say our inflation is, when we know it's much higher than that. Plus, you've got inflation coming from other countries for stuff that we bring in, which is always being passed on. As that is being passed on, people are asking for more wages because they can buy less, which basically means that inflation is going to get worse, which means the OCR is going to have to raise more, which means interest rates are going to raise more, and we're going to be back like we were in the 70s with 17 or 18% interest. When that happens, the amount you have to pay for your mortgage will triple, if not more. So reduce the amount of principal that you have, increase the amount of equity that you have, and insulate yourself against this, because it's almost like it's a plan. And I don't say that lightly. Sometimes you can expect the governments to be benevolent and good at ruling a country and creating laws and running a system. Other times there is a genuine desire to change the system, and that is where we're at now. So in terms of interest rates and mortgage, that is one thing I see coming. I see people that will be defaulting on those, especially if you're a landlord with a second property that you've bought recently. 2 reasons: more supply, less people buying means lower house prices. Lower house prices mean less equity. Less equity means more people being forced to sell. More people selling means more supply, and so on as the house market crashes. Now, as this is happening, other people have got less buying money, less money to spend on disposable items, and less to spend on their rents. So they're not willing to pay higher rents to account for it. And you can't charge higher rents because in some ways the amount of rent you can charge as a landlord is pegged towards what the house value is. So as the house value drops, the amount that you are going to be able to get for your rent drops, and the interest rates are going to go up, which means you're not going to be able to cover the cost of your mortgage with your rental income, not anywhere near. So you're going to have to sell, and then it's going to become worse. So that is what we're in for here in New Zealand. Be prepared. And that is just one aspect of it. Now, of course, you've got the other aspect of what's going on, right? You have the lower end of the socio-economic section or sector of the country. They are strained, very, very strained. And that is why we see violence and crime increasing across here, because they just can't sustain themselves. There is a section of New Zealand's population that do rely on the government's benefits. That can be a problem. The benefits have risen, but not as much as inflation. So they are trying to supplement that. I've been out and about a little bit recently, so I haven't made so many videos, but I have seen a lot of people outside of some of these food banks, and that is something that I say is going to get worse. So this is where we're at. We're going to have increased crime, increased pricing for everything, and if the companies do cave to its employees and increase the wages, they're only going to pass those costs on, and things are going to go up even more. Now, diesel is getting more and more expensive, so are all fuels, and I believe we've just gone over the tipping point. I don't think there is a way to get out of this without a crash. I really don't. And you can see it coming, and it's not in slow motion, it's happening fast. Now, I don't want to be all gloom and doom here, but I do want you to get prepared. Right. What else should we look at then? Let's look at the food supply again quickly, okay? In other countries around the world, there are riots right now. No, our local media is not telling us this because they don't want us to worry. What they did do is they said, oh, we're not going to import any gold from Russia because of what's happening over there with them and Ukraine. So they'll put us clearly on one side of that whole mess, and that is with the West. For better or worse, I think we're stuck there, and I think it's probably for the worst, actually. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to see some of the stuff that I have. There are a lot of food producing factories around the world being systematically demolished. The protests in other countries are by the farmers, essentially, and that is because to meet the green agendas that they have, they want to look at culling animal populations even upwards of 30, 40, 50%, which of course will lead to higher food prices. They then want to restrict the amount of nitrogen fertilizers as well. So the nitrogen fertilizers are going to go to about 10 to 15% of what they currently were, which impacts yields, not just in dairy, in dry stock, in sheep, for pasture, for vegetables, for everything. It is crazy. So that is one other thing that we have going on. And then you've got the war. The war in Ukraine is not going well for the Ukrainians. Russia is doing okay there, and that's because they are a major producer of all of their stuff. Years and years and years of economic sanctions back from the end of the Cold War means that they produce mostly everything that they need. In fact, they produce a lot of the raw minerals that we need for electronic vehicles. They produce most of the raw minerals and things to make all of their weapons. They produce a lot of grains where we do not, and they control probably close to a third of the world's grains, and most of the, when I say most, it's probably 25 to 30% of the energy in forms of gas and oil for Europe mainly. Now, there has been some bias reporting in that regard. People have said Russia's not supplying Europe with energy. They're not doing it, and they're not willing to. Well, this isn't true. What happened is, for a long time, Europe was buying oil and food and grains and natural gas and things from Russia, and it had been buying it with euros, essentially, putting them in an international bank that Russia had access to, right? What has happened is Russia no longer has access to those funds because as part of the sanctions they confiscated them. Rightly so. That's kind of, well, it's theft, isn't it? It's theft of the West from the East, essentially. And there's no trust in that anymore. So Russia has said, if you want our stuff, we're still willing to sell it to you, but you've got to buy it in our currency, in rubles. So you've got to buy our currency and pay for it with rubles. If you don't, we're not going to supply it. And the West said, no, we're not doing that because we don't want to fund your war. Well, rightly so. Why should Russia then supply stuff at a loss with no compensation to a country that is actively hostile against its interests and trying to starve it out? I wouldn't. So, yeah, it's just absolute rubbish what they're saying in the media there. And America. Let's just briefly touch on America as well, shall we? America is blaming Russia for the increase in price of oil, for the increase in price of goods, yet they are experiencing a lot of their product is in an inflationary cycle as well. Why? Because their response to COVID was to give everyone huge stimulus. Huge stimulus is what they've given them. That inflated the monetary supply in the country, which is the world's reserve currency currently, which is under contestation. But it inflated it by something like 30% in a couple of years, which is insane. And then they wonder why they're going to have inflation. Well, it's simple. They produce less, people have more money, so their money is worth less. It might even be as far as say it's completely worthless at this point, considering their national debt. I certainly wouldn't be having any money in US currency, but while they still have the military, or appear to have the military to back their gold and their currency, they will keep spending without ever repaying. And that is the other thing that happened. Russia moved its currency, the ruble, to a gold standard and then upped their interest rates somewhere above 20%. Now they can do that, it caused them momentarily harm, but their currency is going up in value. And more trading partners are starting to use their currency. So we're looking at the end of the American dollar. The petrodollar is going to die. A new system is coming, and all the while the storm for the West will rage on, because we're all tied heavily to the US economic hegemony, and we need to look at another way. We should tie our currency again to gold or something tangible and move towards decoupling from America to insulate us from the pain, probably.
I did want to add, if you end up in default and you have to sell your house, the bank will then take possession of your house and it will try and sell it. If it cannot do so and it cannot cover its debts, it will be in default and will need to raise liquidity. When that happens, the bank will look to, if it can't sell the property to cover its debt, it'll look to enact those bail-in laws that we covered in our first video.
Right. Well, that was our video for today, and if you've liked it, give me a like, drop a comment to let me know, I don't know if the audio quality was that great. I've done a little different from some of the other ones that I've written and essentially scripted a lot more. But let me know. This was a lot quicker, that's for certain. Yeah, give us a like, give us a subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. Catch you later.